Society tells us that grief has a neat, predictable geometry. We're taught that it has 5 stages, that it moves along a timeline, and that the ultimate destination is something called closure. But according to Dr. Pauline Boss, a pioneering family therapist and researcher, closure is a myth. And it is a particularly damaging myth when the person you are grieving hasn't actually died. Consider what happens when the person you love is sitting right next to you, breathing, speaking, but fundamentally gone. Part 1. The Architecture of Ambiguous Loss. To understand this unique kind of pain, we have to go back to the 1970s at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Pauline Boss was working as a researcher and family therapist, and she started noticing a pattern in her patients that traditional psychological frameworks just could not explain. She was studying the families of soldiers who had gone missing in action, as well as families where a father was physically present but completely absent psychologically. In both scenarios, the families were experiencing profound grief, but the grief refused to behave normally. It wouldn't settle. It wouldn't resolve. Boss coined a term for this, ambiguous loss, and she divided it into 2 distinct categories. The first is physical ambiguous loss, which happens when a loved one is physically missing but kept psychologically present. Think of soldiers missing in action, kidnapped children, or people lost in natural disasters. The family has no body, no death certificate, and no definitive proof of death. But the second category, the one we are focusing on today, is psychological ambiguous loss. This occurs when a person is physically present but psychologically absent. According to the American Psychological Association's interviews with Boss, this type of loss is everywhere once you know how to look for it. It is the husband whose personality has been entirely rewritten by a severe traumatic brain injury. It is the mother slowly fading into the fog of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. It is the sibling lost to a severe consuming addiction. The body is still there. The heart is beating. You can hold their hand, you can feed them, you can sit with them in the living room. But the person you knew, the memories you shared, the relational dynamic you built your life upon, is inaccessible. When someone dies, the loss is clear, it is verifiable. We have ancient rituals built around it. We have funerals, we issue death certificates, communities gather with casseroles and condolences. The boundaries of the family change, but they change in a way that society understands and recognizes. But with psychological ambiguous loss, there is no funeral. There is no official demarcation of the loss. The boundaries of your family are entirely blurred. You are left hovering in a state of suspended animation, waiting for a resolution that may never come. And this lack of clarity creates a very specific, chronic kind of trauma. Part 2. The mechanics of frozen grief. So what actually happens to the human mind when it is forced to endure a loss that it cannot verify? Pauline Boss describes it as frozen grief. Because there is no definitive end point, the natural grieving process is halted in its tracks. Human beings are hardwired to seek patterns and seek resolution. When we face a problem, our brains want to solve it. When we face a loss, our brains want to process it and integrate it so we can adapt to our new reality. But ambiguous loss denies the brain that opportunity. You cannot fully grieve a person who is still asking you what is for dinner, even if they don't remember your name. The ambiguity blocks cognition. It paralyzes the normal mechanisms of coping and decision-making. Research published in journals like Bereavement Care and studies funded by organizations like the International Committee of the Red Cross have looked deeply into the physiological and psychological toll of this ambiguity. They have found that individuals dealing with ambiguous loss experience chronic, unrelenting stress. It is not just sadness, it is a profound immobilization. Caregivers of people with dementia or traumatic brain injuries often report feeling stuck. They describe high levels of anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of helplessness. Let us break down why this happens. In a normal grieving process, as painful as it is, the finality of death allows the surviving family members to eventually begin reorganizing their lives. They figure out who is doing the chores, who is managing the finances, how to celebrate holidays without the deceased. But when the person is still physically present, those roles cannot be easily reassigned without immense guilt and confusion. If your spouse has severe dementia, you are technically still married, you still have a partner, but you're functioning as a solo caregiver. You are a widow who is not a widow. You are mourning someone who is sitting across the table from you. This creates an intense ambivalence, which Boss identifies as one of the most painful side effects of ambiguous loss. Ambivalence means holding two contradictory feelings at the exact same time. A caregiver might feel deep, profound love for their ailing parent, while simultaneously harboring a desperate, secret wish for the ordeal to just be over. And because wishing for the ordeal to be over feels perilously close to wishing for the parent to die, the caregiver is consumed by guilt. This guilt further isolates them, freezing the grief even more solidly. They cannot move forward, but they cannot stay where they are either. Part 3. The cultural demand for resolution. To make matters worse, we live in a culture that is deeply uncomfortable with unresolved pain. We are a society of fixers. We like our problems to have solutions, our stories to have neat endings, and our grief to have a timeline. When someone is dealing with the psychological ambiguous loss of a loved one, they often encounter what sociologists call disenfranchised grief. This is grief that is not openly acknowledged, publicly mourned, or socially supported. Because the loved one is still alive, friends and extended family often do not know how to react. They might say things like, "Well, at least you still have him," or "You should be grateful she's still here." These comments, while usually well-intentioned, completely invalidate the caregiver's reality. They dismiss the fact that a profound, life-altering loss has actually occurred. This cultural demand for resolution leaves people dealing with ambiguous loss feeling incredibly isolated. They are carrying a heavy, invisible burden that no one else seems to recognize. In cases of traumatic brain injury, for example, studies show that friends and extended family often pull away over time. They do not know how to interact with the altered version of the person, so they just stop coming around. The primary caregiver is left entirely alone, managing both the physical demands of caregiving and the psychological weight of an unacknowledged mourning process. And then there is the pressure of closure. Pauline Boss is highly critical of the concept of closure, calling it a dangerous idea when applied to human relationships. Closure implies a door shutting, a neat ending, a final detachment. But when you are dealing with ambiguous loss, demanding closure is a fool's errand. You cannot close the door on a situation that is inherently open-ended. Attempting to force closure only leads to more anxiety and more feelings of failure when the grief inevitably surfaces again. Over her decades of research, Pauline Boss developed a framework for treating and managing ambiguous loss, and it does not involve finding a cure for the grief. Instead, it involves building a tolerance for ambiguity. It is about learning to live comfortably inside the paradox. One of the most vital tools in this framework is what Boss calls both-and thinking. Because ambiguous loss is inherently contradictory, our thinking must adapt to hold those contradictions. Instead of trying to force the situation into a binary of alive or dead, present or absent, caregivers are encouraged to embrace the paradox. It sounds like this. My father is both here and he is gone. I am both a married woman and I am grieving the loss of my marriage. I am both terribly sad and I am finding moments of joy in my own life. This both-and thinking relieves the pressure to figure out exactly what the situation is. It validates the reality of the loss while acknowledging the reality of the physical presence. It gives the brain permission to stop trying to solve an unsolvable puzzle. Another crucial step is meaning-making. When closure is off the table, the goal shifts to finding meaning in the experience. This does not mean finding a silver lining or pretending that the tragedy is actually a blessing. It means constructing a narrative that allows you to integrate the loss into your life. It means accepting that the relationship has fundamentally changed and figuring out how to honor what it used to be while navigating what it is now. Boss also talks about the importance of revising attachment. This is a delicate, difficult process. It involves recognizing that the person you were deeply attached to is no longer available in the same way, and allowing yourself to gently loosen that specific bond so you can survive. It means you can still love the person with dementia, you can still care for them, but you also have to give yourself permission to seek emotional support, connection, and joy elsewhere. You have to realize that you are allowed to have a life even while your loved one's life is compromised. Coping with ambiguous loss is like learning to breathe underwater. The environment is unnatural, the pressure is immense, and the old rules of gravity simply do not apply. But by naming the loss, by rejecting the myth of closure, and by embracing the complex paradox of both-and, it is possible to unfreeze the grief. It is possible to find a way to keep moving, not by leaving your loved one behind, but by carrying the unresolved nature of your love for them with a new kind of strength. If you found today's exploration meaningful, please send this episode to someone who might need to hear it.
This is CARECAST. Exploring the heart of care.